I built the Bismarck in my garage. Nobody believes it. The last thing Friedrich Keller heard from his best friend wasn't a cry for help. It was a joke. Seconds later, the steel around them seemed to tear apart. The lights flickered. The deck shifted beneath their feet. And Karl Weiss disappeared behind smoke, seawater, and twisted metal. Friedrich never saw him again. For decades, he managed to forget many of the sounds from that morning, but never that final laugh. It was May 27, 1941, in the North Atlantic, and Friedrich was aboard one of the most feared warships of its time, Bismarck. Many years later, the memory of that sailor and the friend he lost would inspire a craftsman to place something almost absurd on an ordinary garage workbench. Enough bamboo to rebuild Bismarck as a model nearly 5 feet long. But to understand why every tiny part of that model matters, we have to go back several days. Before Karl disappeared, before the rudder stopped responding, before thousands of shells turned that massive battleship into a shattered wreck. Friedrich and Karl had met during training. They were different in almost every possible way. Friedrich rarely spoke unless he had something worth saying. Karl could talk through almost anything. Friedrich checked his equipment twice. Karl misplaced tools and then insisted somebody else had moved them. But inside, the enormous, claustrophobic world of a battleship, narrow steel passageways, machinery spaces, and compartments where daylight could feel like something from another world, they became inseparable. They didn't spend their time talking about politics or glory. They talked about home, food, family, and what they would do when all of it was over. Karl wanted to open a small workshop. Friedrich said he would never step aboard anything larger than a fishing boat again. Neither knew they had only a few days of combat ahead of them. Inside the modern garage, the craftsman began with the exact opposite of a steel battleship: a strip of bamboo, then another. Measurements were marked carefully. The keel profile appeared across the workbench. At approximately 1:170 scale, the finished model would stretch nearly 5 feet. Large enough that mistakes would be obvious, small enough that every detail demanded precision. The keel was cut. Then came the transverse frames, one after another. The skeleton didn't look much like Bismarck yet, but Friedrich remembered a time when the real ship did not mean death to him either. When Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen broke out toward the Atlantic, their mission was to attack Britain's shipping routes. Bismarck carried 8 enormous 38-centimeter guns in 4 twin turrets, 2 forward, 2 aft. To young sailors like Friedrich and Karl, all that armor, machinery, and firepower could make the ship seem almost indestructible. That illusion did not last long. On the morning of May 24th, lookouts were already tracking British warships approaching: HMS Hood, HMS Prince of Wales. The cold sea almost disappeared beneath the tension. Karl looked toward Friedrich and, in our dramatization, did what he always did when he was frightened. He made a joke. If they survived, he said, Friedrich would finally have to admit that Karl was the better card player. Then the shooting started. When Bismarck's main battery opened fire, the entire ship seemed to react. Steel vibrated. The air changed. The concussion traveled through compartments. For the men inside, a naval battle was not a beautiful photograph of ships trading gunfire across the horizon. It was noise, heat, orders, and the knowledge that somewhere beyond those steel walls were men you could not see who were trying to hit exactly where you were standing. Minutes later, HMS Hood exploded. There was almost no time aboard Bismarck to understand what they had just witnessed. The battle was still underway. Prince of Wales also struck the German battleship. One of the critical consequences was leaking fuel. Bismarck had survived a devastating engagement, but she was wounded. The Atlantic commerce raiding mission had to be abandoned. Now the objective was reaching occupied France. Back in the garage, narrow bamboo strips were closing the model's hull. Each plank had to be bent carefully across the frames. The broad center section gained volume. The Atlantic bow emerged. The stern slowly acquired its distinctive shape, and that stern would eventually become one of the most important parts of the entire story. Because a single blow there would help decide the fate of more than 2,000 men. If you enjoy discovering the human stories behind legendary ships as they come back to life, piece by piece, subscribe, because the most important detail on this Bismarck will not be one of its massive guns. It will be near the rudder. After the Battle of the Denmark Strait, Bismarck tried to disappear into the Atlantic. For a while, she succeeded. The crew knew British forces were searching for them, but France still seemed reachable. Every hour brought them closer to friendly air cover and a protected harbor. Friedrich and Karl began to believe they might survive the mission. And that is exactly where everything changed. On May 26th, Bismarck was found again. Aboard the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers launched into terrible weather. Compared with Bismarck, the aircraft looked outdated, slow, vulnerable. But they didn't have to sink the battleship. They only had to prevent her from escaping. The Swordfish came through wind, rain, and anti-aircraft fire. Torpedoes entered the water. One struck a decisive area, the stern. Bismarck's steering system was badly damaged. The rudder became jammed. The crew worked desperately to regain control. Men entered dangerous areas. Repairs were attempted. Nothing restored proper maneuverability. The enormous battleship still had engines, still had guns, still had men. But she had lost something much simpler: the ability to choose where she was going. Friedrich understood that occupied France might never appear on the horizon. Inside the garage, the craftsman held a tiny component between his fingers: the model's rudder. Beside the giant gun turrets and complicated superstructure, it seemed almost meaningless. But without understanding that small component, you cannot understand Bismarck's final hours. That is one of the fascinating ironies of naval engineering. A gigantic warship can be defined by one small part, failing at the worst possible moment. So tell me in the comments, which detail surprises you more? Bismarck's 8 massive main guns, or the comparatively tiny steering system that helped decide her fate? That night, Friedrich and Karl were no longer joking about cards. Bismarck moved without proper control while British warships closed in. Destroyers kept pressure on the battleship through the darkness. Few men slept. Karl eventually talked again about his workshop. He wanted to build things with his hands, repair things, make objects that lasted instead of destroying them. Friedrich listened, then answered with only 3 words: "When we return." Those words would follow him for the rest of his life. At dawn on May 27th, there was nowhere left to escape. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney approached. Soon, the final battle began. British heavy guns opened fire. Bismarck answered. At first, Friedrich could still distinguish the German turrets firing. Then all the sounds began to blend together. Shells struck the superstructure, cables snapped, fragments tore through spaces, equipment failed, communication became increasingly difficult. Inside the modern workshop, the model's 4 main turrets were taking shape: Anton, Bruno, Caesar, Dora. 8 barrels in total. Each barrel had to match the others. Each turret needed the characteristic geometry of the original battleship. Silent craftsmanship recreating machines designed to produce a sound men once struggled to forget. On the real Bismarck, the ability to return fire was rapidly being destroyed. Friedrich and Karl received an order and moved through a passageway. Karl made one more joke. He said Friedrich still owed him that card game. Friedrich answered that they could settle it in France. Then came the impact. The space ahead vanished behind smoke and flying debris. Friedrich was thrown against a bulkhead. For several seconds, he could hear nothing. Then water. Alarms. Men shouting. He called Karl's name. No answer. He tried to move forward. Someone pulled him back. The area was wrecked. He called again. Karl never answered. That morning, Friedrich's best friend stopped being a young man with plans for a workshop. He became an absence. And perhaps that is what casualty numbers can never explain. When we read that a ship carried more than 2,000 men, we see a number. Friedrich saw 2, himself and Karl, then only 1. The battle continued. Bismarck absorbed devastating fire. Her main turrets fell silent. Her superstructure was shattered. Fires spread. Torpedoes struck as well. Eventually, the fight became something simpler. Survival. Friedrich reached the weather deck. The battleship that had seemed almost invulnerable only days before was barely recognizable. The Atlantic was freezing. Oil covered portions of the water. Smoke drifted across the wrecked ship. Bismarck began to disappear beneath the sea. Friedrich entered the water. The cold hit almost as violently as the gunfire had. Around him were wreckage and men. He searched for Karl, even though he already knew. Soon the battleship sank beneath the Atlantic. More than 2,200 men had been aboard. Little more than 100 would be pulled alive from the sea. In our dramatization, Friedrich was one of them. But part of him stayed behind that morning. Decades later, whenever somebody asked him about Bismarck, they expected stories about the guns, about Hood, about the chase, about the size of the ship. Friedrich remembered 3 words: when we return. Inside the garage, the model was finally approaching completion. Primer, historically appropriate gray tones, deck surfaces, turrets, superstructure, masts, fire control directors, secondary batteries, anti-aircraft weapons, boats, rigging, and at the stern, that tiny rudder. The craftsman installed the final component, then moved his hands away. For the first time, Bismarck stood complete on the workbench, nearly 5 feet long, 8 main guns, 4 massive turrets, a silhouette almost impossible to mistake. But after learning the story, it was difficult to see only a machine. There had been thousands of young men involved in that chase and battle, on every side. Men who were afraid, men who lost friends, men who never returned home. That is why preserving history does not mean glorifying war. It means remembering what war costs. Karl never opened his workshop. But in this story, decades later, another workshop built something for him. Not a weapon, a memory. If this Bismarck made you see the story differently, share the video with someone who also believes naval history is made of machines, but remembered because of people. Tell me which historic ship should appear in this garage next, and subscribe for the next build. Because the bamboo sitting on this workbench may look ordinary now, but it could be the beginning of another story nobody should forget.